this review, I'm going to be reviewing the Nikon D3100 digital SLR camera. Now this is Nikon's newest beginner digital SLR model, and what I'm going to be doing in this video is basically going over what I think about this camera, my opinions on the camera, the performance of the camera. I'm going to show you some sample images of high ISO images with this camera, which is one of the notable differences with this camera between its older model and with models that are available today. Now, first thing I'm going to go over is the look and feel of the camera. First thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to take off this lens. By the way, this lens is the Nikon 55 to 300mm lens, which is also new and came out with the D3100 as well. And it is quite a spectacular lens. Now here's a look at the body. As you can see, one of the greatest pros about this camera is simply just the size of it. Very, very small camera. Easy to carry around with you. This could even fit in my cargo pants pocket if I wanted it to without a lens. So very portable, very easy to carry around. There is one of the biggest advantages to the camera that I love about this camera, and it's a huge difference. It may not seem that big, but it really is the amount of controls that it now has on the outside of the body. It's more professional in that sense. Like, for instance, the Nikon D3X, which I have back here, that's the camera that I use. It has tons of controls on the outside. And the reason why I look for stuff like that, and why professional photographers look for things like that, is because it's a lot quicker and a lot easier to change settings. Well, now the Nikon D3100 has some of these settings as well. It added this new switch here, which allows you to flip between these 4 settings: single frame shooting, continuous frame shooting, timer, and quiet mode. And all those things on the D3000, at least, you had to go into the menu or in search for them, or you had to do it in the info screen, which just takes a lot longer, and it's just really kind of a pain, especially when you take a lot of pictures. So the fact that it's got more controls on the outside and more options make it a lot easier and quicker to change settings, and that's definitely a big plus for the D3100. Finally, some more of the cons of the outside, the look and feel and stuff, is that it still is a beginner SLR, so it doesn't have nearly as many controls as, say, a Nikon D3X or a more professional camera like the Nikon D90 or D300S or other cameras like that would have. So it's a little bit slower to control with. You have to go into the info menu here like this and change it by pressing the I button here. And once you press the I button, it takes you to that, and you have to scroll through all these things and change them manually, which can take a little while sometimes. But once again, not that big of a deal. But anyway, another con to this camera is, yes, it is very small and very lightweight. The problem is that since it's so small, bigger lenses kind of throw it off balance. Even this lens here, which is kind of a lens meant to go on this, is a bit large for it, in my opinion. I'm going to put it on here. You can actually see that most of the camera now is just this lens, and most of the weight is actually the lens now. When I carry it like this, it feels very front heavy and stuff. I can't imagine what it would feel like if I put a more professional lens on the front. But then again, this is geared towards more beginner photographers, so they're probably not going to be using big, expensive, heavy lenses on this. But yeah, definitely wouldn't recommend doing that because it throws it off balance and makes it kind of uncomfortable to shoot with. But once again, that's not a huge deal. Now what I'm going to talk about is some of the new things that this model comes with that the D3000 doesn't come with. And of course I'm going to go into more depth with that with my Nikon D3100 versus D3000 review, and where I compare the two cameras together. One thing that's new is, of course, it has a completely new sensor, 14.2 megapixels. Not many more megapixels, that doesn't make that much of a difference, but where the difference does come in, I found, is at the higher ISO, which I'm going to talk about later. It does add a lot more variety with your ISO. It can go all the way up to 6400 ISO now. And it also incorporates full HD video. Now this is a very big plus for this camera. I've never really used a camera with video before because, you know, I'm not as into video as much as I am into photography. but I gave it a shot and it is amazing quality video. And of course I am putting up a video purely on just the HD video recording capability of this camera in a separate video that you can check out. But overall I was very pleased. The video quality is as good or better than a lot of cameras that are worth thousands and thousands of dollars. A lot of video cameras that are worth that much. And you can actually switch lenses, you can do whatever you want, so the varieties really are endless with that. Some of the new things that come with the video is that it's able to do 10 minutes now. It can do 10 minutes of solid video recording in full HD, which is just great. A big improvement, especially from a camera like the Nikon D90, which could only do 5 minutes before, and only do 720p HD shooting. A nice thing about this also is that it incorporates AF during video shooting. And that's a new feature that no other Nikon has ever done before, except in the new Nikon D7000 camera. And I must say, it is very useful. You know, it's maybe not useful for more professional video, but especially for things like a kid's soccer game or something that you want to get really high definition with, but you don't want to have to worry about manual focusing. Oh, it's very, very useful, and it does help out a lot. Finally, the camera also incorporates a new control called distortion control in their control settings, and it can be useful too. So if you have a lens that has a lot of distortion, you can turn that on and it'll reduce that distortion a little bit. Now, it doesn't always fix all the distortion in a lot of lenses, but it does a decent job, especially in lenses like the 18 to 200mm, which have heavy distortion at the wide end and such. The next thing I want to go on to is the performance of this camera. And like I said, the real highlight of this camera is the ISO performance. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take over to ScreenFlow and I'm going to take a look at some sample images that I took from ISO 800 all the way up to ISO 3200. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the sample images that I took with the Nikon D3100 at higher ISOs, starting with 800, 1600, and then ending at 3200. We're going to look at all of these full size and at 100%, then we're going to compare it to a D3 image that I took at ISO 1100. Starting with ISO 800, as you can see, the noise is not very visible, not even really in the dark region, which is great. Here we are at 1600. You can see the noise goes up quite a bit. It's a little bit noisier, especially down here in the yellowish area, but still pretty well controlled. And finally, 3200, you can see, is still a very nice image. You do have quite a bit of noise in the darker areas, but especially in this bright area here, you can't really see much noise at all. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to look up close. You can see here, even though there is some noise, there's quite a bit of detail retained in this. Definitely a good performer for a beginner SLR model. Not bad at all. And considering this is also taken with a cheaper lens, this is pretty good. And you can see there's quite a bit of detail still retained. Like I said, probably easily as good as the D300 was. And here we are at 1600. You can see there's quite a bit of noise in these yellow areas over here, these dim areas, but that's what's to be expected. That's kind of how most cameras are like this. If we go up to the brighter area though, you can see that you can't really see the noise as well anymore. But yeah, it does get a little bit noisy, but not bad at all. Here's the best example of the ISO that I have here, because we've got a really bright area, and this is at 3200 ISO. As you can see, there is noise, but there's still a lot of detail too, and the noise is not all that visible. And remember, this is at 100% view. This is pretty amazing for the cheapest camera that Nikon's offering right now. You see there's quite a bit of noise in the darker areas, once again, but still not a bad image. You could print this image out pretty decently sized and still have a good image, and very impressive ISO performance. Now we can kind of compare this D3 image at ISO 1100 to the D3100 images. Here's the 1600 ISO image. You can see that the D3100 has more of the color chroma aberration noise. You can see the greens and the reds in there, whereas the D3 doesn't, but you can still see that the noise difference isn't huge. The D3 is definitely a better performer, but not bad at all for D3100. And here we are at ISO 800, comparing that to the D3.
D3 is performing better, obviously, but even so, the D3100 is still a great contender, and there's not actually a huge difference in the noise, which is very impressive. And Nikon has definitely made a great improvement to noise with this camera.
One more thing I want to talk about with the performance now is the speed of the camera. Now this is the beginner model from Nikon, so it's not a very fast camera. Just 3 frames per second, pretty slow when it comes to buffering. Every time you take a picture it takes a second or two for it to load up the picture in the playback menu. But that's really to be expected with this type of camera. You know, it's still a lot faster than any compact you can get, which is of course a real plus. And it still performs amazingly, and it's plenty fast enough for like a kid's soccer game or you know, slow action sports or anything like that. Finally, I'm just going to do an overall what I think about this camera, my opinions on it. Of course, my opinions on this camera are extremely good. This camera performs very well. What I'm most impressed with is its performance at higher ISOs. It's truly incredible how amazing these cameras have gotten over the years. I definitely say that the ISO performance outperforms the D300 did, which is only a 2 or 3 year old camera right now. It's truly amazing what Nikon can do. If you're a beginner though, and you're getting your first digital SLR, this is definitely the camera to get. It can do practically anything you want, including shooting full HD video. There is no way you could go wrong with this camera. And of course, with a good 18 to 55 millimeter and this 55 to 300 millimeter lens, you have all the zoom range that you could possibly need for years to come, and you'll be able to take pictures of pretty much whatever you want. So I definitely highly recommend the Nikon D3100 camera.